What happened after the war is that the stories of the children were really repressed. And not necessarily only by them, but also by society at large. The children were seen as survivors of the war, and that's it. They weren't seen as having suffered anything. Just over half of the children in Belgium were deported, and half were saved. About 5,000 were saved. Some were saved by networks of priests, especially in the south of the country.
One of the strongest memories I have of my childhood was when I arrived here at 4 years old. A couple of months later, I'm walking with my mother, and we're in South Orange, and we're by Seton Hall, and all of a sudden these 3 nuns are coming at me. I let go of my mother's hand, and I run to the nuns, and I hold on to their legs, and they're patting me on my head. Of course, they don't know what happened, and my mother's yelling, "Paulette, come back, come back." And then she comes and she explains to them how wonderful they were to me.
When my family went into hiding, I was about a year old, a year and a few months old. By my family, I really mean my mother, because my father at that point was in a concentration camp. My early years were as a Catholic, and even in France, when all my friends were having their communions, I wanted to have a communion too. And I learned that it was then that I learned that I was Jewish, and Jews did not have communions.
That is one way in which children were hid. People got in touch with the resistance, and the resistance came, the escorts came, took the children from the parents and brought them to designated places. Escorts were all women. It would have been hard to trust men in that. The other way in which children were hidden was if parents approached the convent or the parish priest individually. The adaptation differed, but depending also on the convent, on how tolerant the convent was. For instance, in the question of conversion, there were convents that wanted to baptize at all costs, and convents that didn't force the children. Some children who really found consolation in the Catholic religion. For instance, they replaced their mother by the Virgin Mary, and they prayed to the Virgin Mary for their parents. I think there are 2 main motivations. One is the possibility of converting lost souls to Catholicism. The second one is really humanitarian, and today it is impossible to disentangle the 2 motivations. The children were in the convent under the impression that their parents were coming back. In one convent, for instance, the Mother Superior did not tell many sisters that they were Jewish children. She would tell them that they were Protestant children, and they could not go to confession and to communion. And in other convents, all the nuns knew. So these are all individual stories. That was the big thing, that everything, the deportations were done under the guise of deportations for labor in the East. That made it, seem not so. They knew it was going to be terrible, but at least you could, by working, you could save yourself. Nobody talked about extermination. It was amazing how the Germans succeeded, in effect, in hiding the question of extermination.
I do feel I lost my childhood, especially the early years, the years where I was in hiding. My parents would often say, "How could you have remembered anything? You were too young." I think they protected themselves from feeling that I was traumatized in the way that they were traumatized. They wanted to protect me from that too, so they denied that the war had any impact on me, because if I was so young, I wouldn't remember what had happened. I wouldn't understand what would happen, and therefore it wouldn't have an impact on me. And of course now as a psychologist, psychoanalyst, I know full well being so young can actually have more of an impact, a traumatic impact, than being an older child who's already who had a relatively good childhood and developed certain strengths, but being born into it and being so young and being confused and feeling the anxiety all around, but not being able to conceptualize it or verbalize it, has a powerful effect. My father escaped from the concentration camp with great planning, and he had access to outside clothing. So he had planned to steal these overalls. He had planned to escape on the side of the cemetery. There were guards in the tower. Particularly, they were watching the forest because they were looking for escapees. And he picked a time of day when he knew they would be eating their lunch. And there was a barbed wire around the wall. It was like a high wall. I actually got to see it some years later. And my father, who was at that point 41 years old, was quite fit. And he jumped over the wall. And luckily, there was no one on the other side. He was also lucky because he was able to blend in with a group of mourners who were walking around in the cemetery. And that's how he escaped. He initially went to the home of some people who knew where my mother and I were hidden. And we were hidden in a small village called Gimnavoda. There was somebody who knew where we were, and he went with him. It was the dead of winter. They walked yards apart so that they wouldn't be identified. So if my father would be caught, this man wouldn't be implicated. And they arrived in the town of Gimnavoda, and they found where my mother was hidden. My mother and I were living in this apartment in a home of a family that did not know that they were harboring Jews. My mother was passing as a Christian, a Catholic, and I at that point was 2 years old. My mother was able to hide him in an attic that was adjoining the apartment. We were on the second floor, and there was a small attic. He was hidden there for close to 2 years. My mother did not tell me much, except that I should stay away from the attic because there was a wolf there, and that it was very dangerous for me to be there. And although I was only 2, I got it. I understood that this was danger and to stay away from there. But eventually, my father came out of the attic. It was never explained to me, but because they felt I was too young to really understand any of it. I was just told that I had to be very careful and never tell anyone that he was there.
My name's Paulette Wren Dorflaffer, but first it was Corsia, and then it became Paulette Wren Wolf. And my family was from Spain, and then they went to Oran, Algeria, and then from there they went to Marseille, France. When I came to this country, my parents told me I'm Jewish, I'm from France, and I didn't have any more family. Then when I turned 21, my father said, we have to go to the French embassy. In 1971, we'll call the French embassy. I couldn't believe it. I go, what? I have family after 26 years. I couldn't believe it. A brother and two sisters. 1972. I went to France in February, and I arrived February 9th, the day I arrived to America. And I said, I don't know if I'm going to recognize them or not. It was very meaningful meeting the family.